like to think about the most ideal LibGuide that you would like to make, perhaps influenced by what other people have done, perhaps something that you would like to do. It'll also give us a little break from looking at a screen. Awesome. So I asked us to imagine this because today I'm going to talk about LibGuides and the work that we've been doing, not only to think about what they look like, but what information that they hold. And before I do that, I do want to introduce myself and the context that I'm coming from in talking about this project. So I work in a department called Creative Works at Robert E. Kennedy Library, where we're developing a digital publishing program for Cal Poly, immersive, interactive digital publications. Specifically, we're trying to rework ideas about publishing systems and how they can be more inclusive, right? Scholarship, academia, libraries as knowledge organization institutions, all at the moment hold standards that we may take for granted, right? But what, and perhaps more importantly, who gets left out by the standards, right? These standards are upheld by systems within publication, peer review and assessment, dissemination, and so on. And they've been historically built to fit white, hetero, cis, male standards. So in the digital publishing project, we're reassessing these ideas, these systems, partially by trying to just expand the definition of what digital academic publishing here at Cal Poly can be understood as, right? What's a publication? What content should be considered scholarship? Not only a PDF of written text and deposited in institutional repositories, but more, from data visualizations to digital translations of ephemeral exhibits to podcasts, right? And then further, what is peer review? Can we expand upon that idea? Who are our peers? What does a review look like? And so through understanding these systems, through researching across disciplines and various formats, I should be clear that I think that a publication, especially a digital one, indicates a story or an argument that's open to the public. And that then includes our LibGuides, right? So these LibGuides are also now more important than ever in thinking about how we leave signposts for students to find resources, especially in this really difficult virtual environment. And so these ideas of publication, review, and criticality have formed this project, the LibGuides Open Review Discussion Sessions, or LORDS for short, a review culture for LibGuides. So often when we're handed a platform, they become the default standard tool, right, for how librarians share their information. And these sessions have given us the ability to rethink what a LibGuide can be, to reassess our own institutional structures by using them. These LibGuides contain arguments, right, about how to reference or understand resources, and they should encompass the thought or the reasoning of the author writing, be transparent about why those resources are chosen. These published ideas are not neutral, right? They still do contain a viewpoint. They're not just product demonstrations, right? So for example, to explain what to do with the search engine without explaining how the search engine works is a disservice to our students. And in this work, we talk about how necessary that critical lens is from the very beginning. So these sessions have been helpful to embed ideas from critical pedagogy and critical race theory into the crucial foundational aspect of our jobs, right? To provide reference, to think about how we instruct information literacy. And they have us coming together to rethink how we can support scholarship, and more importantly, how we can support our scholars. So LibGuides, the platform, the framework, is the common denominator for a conversation about what we do together. And we talk to each other with a critical eye upon this collective work while holding our own perspectives and our own positionalities, right? And all of this started with the really simple idea of being accountable for our own work. How many of scholars of color do we really cite, right? And many higher education institutions are made up of majority white scholars. We here at Cal Poly are a predominantly white institution. And so we're being accountable to our own networks by developing and then using tools like a scholar representation by race box to be transparent about who we are citing. Then we had to have conversations about how to do this. How do you count people by race, right? How can you make those assumptions? We live in our daily lives with these kinds of assumptions of racial categories, so to use them in such a transparent way may and does bring about discomfort in looking and acknowledging that those assumptions may be important. And it also takes extra work to tally who you're citing, right? Googling and reading introductions and bios, positionalities, going on websites. But this idea of a race representation by tally is a tool for seeing and acknowledging that our fields, or who we cite, are potentially also predominantly white. And this is important then, because then we can acknowledge that race affects academia too, right? We can be uncomfortable in talking about whiteness and be transparent about that, to point towards what representation looks like and better our own understandings on how we participate in those politics of citation. And this idea can be taken beyond tally. Who or what communities are prioritizing our LibGuides, even by placement? Is the community of color at the bottom, right? Which can make it then seem like are those people of color an afterthought placed at the bottom of the LibGuide. So what about LibGuides that don't have specific scholars or editors or individuals listed? How do we shift this idea for LibGuides with databases? How do you translate this kind of transparency into LibGuides that are more user directive or LibGuides that seemingly are just objective, right? After all, resources and hence LibGuides look different by discipline or department. So throughout this project, we have created collectively a statement that describes the bias not only in the databases we provide, but publishing systems in general. Being clear that the algorithms, for example, our bias can at least provide a start to the criticality in thinking about what information we reference. We may not be experts in every single field, but we are experts in how to organize information and the flaws in thinking about that organization of information, right? And so we can point out the academic capital of certain resources so that students can understand what systems they're entering in, that politics of citation. And we can push towards pointing out the system, right? Rather than just pointing towards exceptions in the system. This is the important work that libraries have to do themselves to ensure that we're serving California's public as best as we possibly can. And so through these discussion sessions, we've had conversations about other really important topics. Not only the bias in our systems, but how we can really, play with content and format, how to effectively use visuals. What does it look like to give context? How much context to give? How do you differentiate between what you can do with information versus how you can find information? And we take our own experiences of navigating through our LibGuides and bring those together. Because another important aspect of rethinking our LibGuides is placing ourselves in this context, right? We're rethinking about how we publicly present ourselves and our voices in these published documents. So thinking about what professionalism means, what language we use or that we assume is already understood. I know personally, I grew up in Louisiana, a product of the public school systems there. And when I got to college, the learning curves were a little bit steep when the standards and ideas of scholarly were invisible within the word, right? So all of these conversations are guided by a rubric, and I'll share that in a second. But the rubric supports the conversation because it's the framework that holds our collective ideas of what we expect also from ourselves. And then it's applied through talking and revision. This whole project has been honestly a lot of time together to talk about what we're doing as people who reference other people's work. And the rubric itself was a collaborative effort, right? Shout out to my colleagues at Cal Poly, Laura Savetti, Sarah Lester, Russ White, and Mercedes Rutherford Patton for taking the time to start listing and developing ideas that we thought were great. And that process for sure takes thought. What do you really want in your ideal? What can you really imagine beyond the time, energy, and effort restraints that we as moral people in a pandemic currently have to deal with, right? And so we curated categories like basics, exploring race awareness, accessibility, library positionality, outreach, and they're rated through this needs improvement, this is fine, and this is great as a scale. So in our sessions at Cal Poly, we go through one LibGuide at a time, thinking about these ideas in acknowledgement, scaffolding that centers people of color, and contextualizing our chosen resources, time, conversation, care. So using LibGuides as a structure, these ideas can be integrated in other digital publications, right? And be widely applied towards anything that our institutions publish, especially as multiple forms of scholarly communication emerge. This review system will be the model for our own digital publishing system at Robert E. Kennedy Library. So Lords is focusing on what we have, right? Working with what we have, LibGuides that are already there. And this whole project is still in process. We're still working out what it looks like to outreach, working out to make sure that everyone who works in the library, everyone, is comfortable enough to participate in these sessions and so on. San Francisco State University and CSU Dominguez Hills have had their own localized review session. Shout out to Melissa and Dana here, to much reported success. As we continue to develop these systems to sustain these models, we're hoping to fold in all the institutions and CSUs and have other local and inter-CSU wide sessions. Our first CSU, California State University session was actually last week, and we brought together 4 people from 4 institutions for a total of about 13 people to use a more broadly made CSU applicable rubric to talk together. We all came together to to talk about a rubric about, sorry, a LibGuide about anthropology. And I don't think anyone in the Zoom room was an expert on anthropology, but we took the time to collaborate and have a conversation about a few of these ideas, right? Accessibility, content contextualization, critical race theory application, librarians' positionality. And I think it went pretty well. I think some said it was freeing to discuss ideas with people who aren't necessarily in that campus, but has that CSU context to talk and see how other people work, have gone through the same difficulties, and just be in a space to share and give each other feedback. So we're planning to implement this system hopefully this academic year so that both local and intercollegial LibGuide review discussion sessions will continue. I want to be transparent too that this project may sound like it's simply like taken off and done wonderfully, but it was hard sometimes to do this work, right? And during a pandemic and a virtual tumultuous fall quarter, because we have quarters here. So having these conversations and using these rubrics and even just making sure to be able to set aside time and willingness for people to come together and share the potential to rethink how it's always been done. All this work that came out was not without tensions or difficulties and conversations. It was work to think and talk about how to incorporate ideas that do involve diversity or inclusion, accessibility, and equity, and not just tacking on words or using the terms without their true context, right? But taking the time to collectively understand what critical race theory is, critical librarianship, and their potential applications. I also want to emphasize that I may be the one speaking to this work, but it's not me only, and it's been truly about collaboration. I'm fortunate enough to have people who are supportive, not only in showing up and taking the time and the care, but collectively furthering these ideas, thinking about sources like Allison Hicks' article about LibGuides as pedagogy to oppress, Dr. Sophia Umoja-Noble's work on algorithms of oppression, Change of Subject documentary, and so many others, including critical librarianship scholars and or Black feminist scholars in their ideas about space, place, and ways to reimagine where we are. Because as gatekeepers of knowledge, libraries, and by extension, LibGuides should be a key part of the university to help support and develop critical thinking skills, right? Often here, the work is looked to be guided elsewhere in an underfunded and overworked ethnic study department or at the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology, but the library, of course, should be one of those places to be utilized too, right? So we made a LibGuide about these LibGuides at Cal Poly, and on that you'll find a link to rubrics like this one, which you're free to explore, use, adjust for your own institutions. So to wrap up for me, I want to go back to that first beautiful LibGuide that you potentially, ideally imagined when we all closed our eyes a bit ago, right? And I actually want us to push past that a little bit, to think about LibGuides as more than just that final project, right? The whole project, Lords, is not actually about that final beautiful LibGuides. It's about the process, a continuous process. It's about maybe rethinking what beautiful really means. And I think that can be developed largely by this community. So thank you for listening to me, and I'll pass on the mic to Charlotte.
Thank you, Jaime.
Thank you so much, Jaime. That was great. I'm super excited to dive more into your LibGuide on LibGuides. And thank you to Dana and the SCORE team for putting this webinar together. I'm super happy to be speaking to you all today. It's a community that I feel like I had lost touch with for a second, right? Except for this. Now this panel is sort of brought together, which is really lovely. So just want to acknowledge that I'm on Ramaytush Ohlone land here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And this year I started giving to the Sogorea Te Land Trust, which is an East Bay project for a term that I've just learned, which is called rematriation instead of repatriation. So it's rematriation of land to the indigenous folks of this area, and it's women-led, which is great. So find other places in your area where you can give back in this way. And so this is, if you've heard me speak before, you've probably seen this slide, right? because I use it all the time. I still use it when I am teaching about publishing, right? When I am teaching about the publishing life cycle, this is what happens when you publish. This is the peer review process. And even for professors and graduate students who've gone through the publishing process, this is still a really nice visualization. It's easy, but I feel free to use it in your own work. Book publisher, your fellow academics book publisher, you and the book publisher, and then librarians at the end, right? And then this is the demographic of higher education library professionals, 86% white. That should not come as a surprise to any of us, right? We all know that the representation is not great. This is the demographics of scholarly publishing professionals. Also not great. And actually, more recently, I've had people ask me like how I'm patient with white librarianship, and I say that scholarly publishing in my previous career was actually harder. So 90% is not a surprise either. Full-time faculty, 72%. We know that there are a higher representation of women, disabled, marginalized identities in adjunct and term faculty. And actually those faculty are not necessarily considered peer reviewers all the time by a lot of publishers, right? So in this system where we have librarians, publishers, and peer reviewers who are predominantly white, like the question is who holds the power in the system, right? What does it mean when a publisher says, oh, it won't sell, and it won't because the librarians who are purchasing are part of this white dominant culture, right? So let me sit on this for a bit. And there are countless examples of how this lack of representation plays out in actual careers, right? People who don't get published, people who have reviewers assigned to them who are not appropriate, journals that devote an issue to Black Lives Matter but don't have a single Black author in that issue. Yeah. And publish and perish is still very much a thing. And that's not the only factor. I mean, we've seen, I think, professors who have published and are respected and still haven't gotten tenure. So there's more than that, but I mean, it is an element, right? And this is true also in library publishing and academic librarianship, right? These are just 4 examples of how racism manifests itself in library publishing. And it's a really dense slide. I'm so sorry, but basically these 4 examples I brought up because they're mistakes, and then there was public outcry, and then people turned around, right? But it still happened, and it wasn't with racist intention, but it was just something that happened within librarianship. And you don't really have to look far. Like these things just come across my Twitter, come across my desk. People ask me, did you see this? And I'm like, oh, I did not. Thank you. And then we all write letters saying, hey, you should maybe take that down. That's really racist. So it happens frequently. All this kind of racist behavior, this marginalization of people and identities, because we all live in a system that is built this way, right? It is possible to think that intent makes something sexist or racist. Tracy McMillan Cotton says, she says, I'm a sociologist. For me, perpetuating the inequalities resulting from intergenerational cumulative disadvantage doesn't require intent. In fact, racism and sexism work best of all when intent is not a prerequisite. And I think Jaime, in her LibGuide project really exemplified that, right? Like our default is to not examine, right? And so we have to work really, really hard to examine even things like our LibGuides. So one of the things that I teach in my classes to students is actually how this manifests itself, not just in the race and identities of the authors, but also like on a global scale, right? This is actually an interactive article published in Nature in 2013 on gender in publication in science. And I don't use it to illustrate gender. I actually use it to demonstrate how much the US dominates the publishing landscape, and people don't know that, right? So that's the green bar on the right. And I also show students how the global north dominates the landscape of publishing, not just in science literature, but in databases, right? show how our library databases are flawed. And actually the 2016 Web of Science, my partner tells me the only reason that Brazil and Australia are so well represented there is because Zika that year, right? Which is where a lot of the publication is happening. But as you can see, they have very different representations in the Europe and Asia area. Scopus has some bias issues, right? Okay, for what journals they accept and which they don't. So that's something to be aware of as we show our students these databases and rely on them. Oh, sorry, next slide. And part of the reason why we don't question this as librarians is because, you know, we're all about teaching authenticity and how to do research, and we want people to trust our databases and our resources, but also we don't like questioning these things, right? We don't like questioning academia. We don't like questioning libraries as institutions. We don't like questioning that our scholarly communication system might be broken. And I think that's part of the vocational awe that Fabazi Etter talks about, this idea that some institutions are above reproach and are inherently good, right? And so we really need to get past that sort of thinking with our teaching and with our consultations and with our workshops on the scholarly communications ecosystem. So one of the things that I do is in my LibGuide, going back to, is I include resources like Redilac, which is out of the University of Mexico, and Cielo, which is out of Brazil, but they're both global, right? And they're both have English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and all these like different languages, and they're publishing that is global out of the world, not out of the US, not out of North America. Digital Innovation South Africa is clearly from South Africa. But yeah, I am the liaison to the Masters of Migration Studies. And one thing I really emphasize is the importance of researching and citing not just US databases, not just North American, the global North, but all over the world, right? And I do want to inject an element of hope in all these dire things that I have shown you all, which is that these problems with representation, with the available research, and the impact that it has therefore on scholarship and our knowledge, as well as individual lives and careers, there is this acknowledgement that there's a real problem, right, in the scholarly publishing community. So there is a Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communications, which includes all the major scholarly publishers and associations. Spark, which is, if you're engaged in open access at all, a very big player in the global open access movement, has really acknowledged that it's not just access that's an issue, but also access to production, right? The Library Publishing Coalition has a fellowship, and the ACRL Scholarly Communications Research Agenda really grounds itself in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So for us here in California and the global North, there are things that we can do and be involved in. More of the same. And this is one of the things I like to point to as sort of a very specific pressure point for those who are involved in journals. The American Geophysical Union noticed that there was a huge amount of gender bias in their peer review, right? And they just didn't have the representation that they did in the association in general. So in one of their journals, they put a notice asking authors to submit women, young scientists, and members of other underrepresented groups in our suggested reviewers, age, ethnic, and international diversity. And 3 months before and after, there was such an increase in women reviewers. So they've included this notice in all their journals and in the step where editors recommend reviewers. So there are things that we can all do on a practical level like this to increase representation, to increase access, to sort of solve this problem we have of representation in our scholarly communications ecosystem. And then I guess I will pass it on to the next speaker, actually.
Thank you.
Michele.
Thank you. Okay, let me share my slides. Hopefully that's working. Okay. So thank you to everyone on the panel and from SCORE who invited us to this as well. I personally am on Karkin and Miwok land where I live, but the University of the Pacific where I work is on Yokut's land. So just those announcing those. It is not letting me pull up. So, okay, here we go. So I will be talking about how we at University of the Pacific were charged by our new president to do a DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion audit of the library collection. So ours is a little bit beyond just anti-racist, as we were also doing equity and inclusion as well. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well, but I will try to focus on anti-racist parts. Oops, and I clicked it twice. So to start, I will cover a little bit of background on Pacific and this project. University of the Pacific is a 3-campus school located in Stockton, San Francisco, and Sacramento. The main campus is in Stockton. It's the oldest chartered school in California, and it's been around since 1851. It has 10 schools and nearly 100 majors. It has several doctoral programs. There are technically 3 libraries, 2 in Stockton and 1 in Sacramento. The audit is only happening at the main branch of the Stockton campus library. And then I'm the head of publishing and scholarship support at Pacific, and I manage the institutional repository, the OER faculty stipend program, a couple of open access journals, et cetera, things like that. So a couple of facts and disclaimers. There are a bunch of us working on this at Pacific, and I know several of them are on the webinar to listen, but it's not just me. But unless I'm talking about concrete statistics or the things we're doing, things I say during this presentation should be taken as my opinions. They don't all reflect on the library's DEI committee's thoughts or the university as a whole. The first claim I'm going to make is that a DEI audit of the library's collection is mostly pointless, as you can imagine, having just seen Charlotte's slides of everything being on the white in those spreadsheets. So you're going to find what you expect to find. The majority of print books were and are written by white male Americans and are about white male Americans in the library's collection. The majority of publisher databases we subscribe to have white male CEOs. Our digital collections have varying levels of accessibility. We have very little queer or multilingual representation across everything. But the second claim, which is more positive, is the point of a DEI audit can't be the audit itself. It has to be the conversations you can jumpstart on campus about the findings. So it has to be about what you do about it. And no matter what, anything you do is going to cost money. And unless, I'm not sure if Amanda raised her hand and we need to pause, or if it's, do I need to do anything about that?
Just keep going.
Okay, thanks. So it's what you do about it. And no matter what, anything you do is going to cost money. And unless someone gives you a huge windfall of cash, you'll probably be making incremental changes with couch cushion change and see not much discernible difference in your collections as a whole. I know this is very pessimistic. It doesn't mean it's not worth doing, and you never know what will happen in the future. So you just try and keep trying. So where did we begin? Pacific's new president started on July 1st, 2020. On August 19th, he issued a memo directive internally and publicly about DEI initiatives we would be starting on campus. This is the relevant part to the library from that statement, which was very, very long, but it's online if you want to see it. I highlighted the parts that I find important in this, so that one, we would be doing an audit on the entire collection, which we quickly decided is impossible, and we definitely won't be doing that. And 2, that the materials in our collection need to reflect the diversity of experiences and perspectives of our communities, which they don't currently do very well, but also they never will if we aren't given money to rectify it. And we definitely have not been given any money yet by the university for this initiative. So unsure how this will end up, but so that's the end of the background, and I'll now move into the audits themselves. So as a sample proof of concept start this summer, myself and another staff member who were preparing for a Halloween event and needed a recommended reading list took a subset of the print and ebook and DVD collection of 500 items and ran a set of DEI criteria on a selection of them of just 38, which I know is a random number, but we were just starting. So we were just trying it. So this one and all the other lists are run out of our catalog. We use Innovative's Sierra, and our director of collection strategy used the create list function to run a report for all of the ones with subject matter of horror as a heading, and later for all orders purchased in designated fiscal years. So she exported the list with specifications that we wanted, the DEI committee wanted, which were things like title, author, publication year, publisher, subject headings, vendor, things like that. And then we used Google Sheets to add DEI criteria columns for the audit, and we worked on it together. So how did we decide that criteria, you might ask? We did a lit review search of articles out there on conducting a DEI audit. What we found primarily was at the public, our K through 5 classroom level, but it made logical sense. So we co-opted those with a couple of minor changes. And we later expanded them when we moved from books to study publishers as well. But the initial criteria are the ones that you can see on the screen, and also included is a RefWorks bit.ly link that I created of articles and other materials on things like critical race theory, DEI audits, DEI initiatives at the higher ed library level. Probably more things I'm forgetting, but it's about 40 titles in there. So you can see from the criteria list, it was the common things like title, publication date, creator. And then we did the DEI criteria on the creator themselves. And then we did it on visual representation on the covers of the book. And then we did the main characters, which MC stands for main character, from the abstracts. So from our first selection sample of horror books, we came away with the following statistics. We also learned that it took us approximately 7 minutes to address one title, which was a really long time. Later on, my student works on this too, and he got it down to 5 minutes per title. But either way, we ran the numbers, and it would take us over 3 years to audit the entire collection, working nonstop 24/7, which is not a reasonable plan, and which is why we will not actually audit the entire library collection at any point. But one of the reasons I think it was taking us longer when we did this was that it was our first attempt. And we spent a lot of time debating the criteria while we did it, working out what was relevant to our collection and how we were doing this and what wasn't. For example, we found that unlike with children's picture books, which is where we got the criteria we used, it's a lot harder to determine the main character's disabilities and sexual orientations from an abstract if you don't know the work very well, and you can't flip through it like it's not less than 20 pages like a picture book really quickly. It's also hard for authors, most of whom don't announce, which is fine, but they don't announce their sexual preferences or mental or physical impairments on their websites, so we can't find that information. And we were using a very broad definition of disabilities based on the US's Americans with Disabilities Act, which covers physical and mental impairments that substantially limit major life activities, including walking, sitting, reading, seeing, and communicating, according to their website. So we also, due to the broad definition, we also had a lot of very passionate arguments about whether vampirism and lycanthropy and cannibalism were disabilities. So we did a lot of weird things while we were working on this. But levity aside, mostly what we determined was that our subset was predominantly white male Americans writing about white male Americans. But maybe we thought that it was because these books were older, most of them were pre-2000. We thought maybe if we audited, reviewed our 2019 to 2020 academic year purchases, those would mostly be newer and things might have gotten better in the 20 plus years in the publishing industry. Turns out that no, it did not get better. For this set, we did all 203 print book purchased during the academic year. We had a larger sample size with newer publications, but we still learned that it was predominantly white male American authors. There was more diversity in the content matter, but it was also harder to do this sample set. So most of our horror books had been fiction, which it's easier to tell with the main character, who the main character is. But the majority of last year's purchases were nonfiction, and it becomes exponentially more complicated to quantify subject matter by ethnicity and gender, unless it's a biography, which most of them weren't. But in general, there were more, though still not the majority, of books devoted to female subjects, to more books covering social justice, queer culture, things like that. But the fact that the authors were still mostly white male Americans is infuriating. But it was not that surprising, which you can see. This is very similar to the ones charts that Charlotte had. It's not surprising in the male-dominated publishing industry culture. So this is part 3 of my presentation, where we went from auditing books to auditing the publishers who published the books that we bought. So we decided, after being disappointed in last year's purchases audit, that maybe we would try looking at the publishers, and it would tell us something about, well, who we're buying from. Maybe we can support different publishers. So I added extra columns to it, the Google Sheets, ran new fields from the create list function in Sierra, and tasked student workers to look at these. So what we learned is that the publishers are mostly, the CEOs are mostly white males. The problem with the information that we're gathering and have gathered so far is that a lot of what we do is not going to change. I don't know what it might be like at your institutions, but here we presented to the library's faculty advisory committee in October about this project and what we'd learned so far. And one of the faculty members basically said, we need books from X publisher for our department because that's the standard for teaching and research, and that's all we want to buy, and we don't want to buy anything else. It doesn't matter if it's diverse or equitable. We don't care. We just want this. So that's paraphrased, but the intent comes across. And it's only one voice from one department, but they're probably not alone in the halls of our campus or yours. So I'm not convinced of how we're going to make changes except incrementally. We recently did the same criteria for publisher databases we subscribe to. Again, much like Charlotte's chart, discovered the same thing. Of the 76 primary databases that we subscribe to, most of the CEOs are white males. We also are searching publisher websites to see if they have anti-racist statements or not. For the most part, it does look like they do, but we haven't finished that part of it yet, so I don't have any actual data. And what does an anti-racist statement even mean? It's just words on a website. So unless there's something concrete showing that they're backing up their words with solid actions, it's sort of meaningless too. So we'll see about those. So now I've covered what we've done so far. I'm moving into my last section on future plans. So we're now working on projects to apply web content accessibility guidelines on portions of our LibGuides library website and institutional repository. I'll also be looking much more closely at Jaime's LibGuide on LibGuides to look at the rubric that she and other people at Cal Poly created, because we can use that on our LibGuides too. So thank you. So we've been working on that. We've identified video files in our IR that don't have a transcript or closed captioning, for example, and are working to fix that. Special collections and university archives at Pacific, a portion of their materials are digitized and in our IR, so we're working on them. In addition, archive staff are reviewing their finding aids for terminology, subject headings, keywords, and reviewing their collections as a whole. And they're thinking about adding a statement, an anti-racist statement, basically like Stanford. So Stanford has one called the Special Collections and University Archives Statement on Potentially Harmful Language in Cataloging and Archival Description, which is long, but you can sense what it does. So they're looking into adding something like that. And I'm looking into similar statements for RIR because it has some older theses and dissertations that are pretty racist. So we're looking into things we can do to counteract some of that. A side project to the library audit, which is relevant because the art curator's job falls under the library's hierarchy, is an audit of the university's permanent art collection. Initial results are that we primarily own works by male artists, but additional criteria to evaluate and assess the art collection is forthcoming. And our upcoming plan for next semester will expand on what we've done so far, but involve hiring student workers to be part of the project, more student workers who will just be focused on this. My student workers who have worked on it a little bit are mostly for digital initiatives, not for this. So we're having a whole team for this now. We're hopeful that this will be beneficial for them and for us to work on a research project of this scope, so that they can learn about the publishing world more and the library's role in collection development, and can help us start those conversations on campus that might lead to real change. So the students will be assigned a subject area based on their own interest or their major, and will audit subsets of the print and ebook collection. We plan to host a panel presentation near the end of the semester with them to report back to the university community on what was done and what they discovered, which will then hopefully lead into additional conversations and workshops with faculty over the summer and fall of 2021. So over the next year of the DEI audit project at Pacific, we'll be looking into funding opportunities to help us run the faculty campus conversations, as well as make substantial collection changes. And at the very least, we'll be writing new language for our collection development policies after the conversations that we have in the spring, fall, and summer. We also will be reading this 2020 ALA published book as a library, and hopefully have some takeaways that we can implement with it. And that is the end of mine. So we will all assume happily answer any questions that you have about any of our presentations. I did include a link to my slides there. So if you want to access them for any of the links I have throughout it, you're welcome to get them. And my email address is there as well if you want to contact me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Michele. And now we will move on to the question portion of the event. I should say my fellow officers, Melissa Seeley and Kristen Lawton-Dunker, will be facilitating the question portion.
Sure.
Thanks,
There were
Tina.
only a few questions so far. A couple of comments as well. So for Jaime from Mark B. Raugel, if I say names wrong, I apologize. So he said, as someone who's had their LibGuide reviewed recently, I found it really helpful to try and update my guide, as it helped me to really learn what it means to make a better LibGuide. The rubric really guided me to make positive changes in my guide. And then couple comments from Michelle. Anna Yang really loves your cat earphones. And Chrissy Hirsch says, wow, charged by the president to do a DEI inventory of the library. That is wonderful. As far as questions, the first one is for Charlotte from Paige Mon. So she says, Charlotte, regarding the teaching that you do with students, how do you incorporate teaching about scholarly publishing in the classroom? Do you teach a term-long class, or do you incorporate that in one-shot sessions? If the latter, how do you get faculty buy-in to dedicate teaching time to this topic?
Oh, okay. Well, so I do tailor this presentation that I've given you all, which is like a slice of like the many slide deck options that I have, to whatever class that I am asked to teach for a one-shot session. I'm very lucky that the University of San Francisco has a social justice mission, and professors love it when I say that I'm going to bring a more critical lens into teaching about something so basic as library resources, right? Like, so even just like an intro to library course, I'm going to bring some of this in to be more critical about databases, about who people are citing. If I'm going to be talking about citation and plagiarism and how they all intersect, then I'm going to bring a critical lens in, and professors are really happy because and this has happened both on the undergraduate and the graduate level, this really brings the work that they're reading and that they're going to be writing about alive to students in a way that it wasn't before, because what it does is it connects these writings to people, right? So I've had a really good response from students. And also I will tailor what I'm saying to the subject area of the audience, right? So for example, if I'm talking to our School of Nursing and Health Professions, I will talk about how women are really suffering in terms of their research. Actually, I'm going to share my screen because this isn't in my secret slides that I have for, so this is, This is women's scholarly production during the COVID-19 pandemic for medRxiv. I mean, this is everybody, sorry, not just women. This is everybody's scholarly production during the pandemic in medRxiv, and this is women, right? So I will, I will be very specific. There are statistics that exist for every subject field, or at least just an article about someone talking about how things have been ableist and racist and sexist. And it makes the whatever information literacy objective that I'm trying to teach come alive and be relevant.
Thanks, Charlotte. I see that we have a raised hand from Laura. So if you want to jump in, Laura, with your question.
Yeah, my question was for Jaime Ding about tracking the racial or ethnic identity of authors. I definitely understand why we would want to make sure that we're citing people who are, representative of the field and an inclusive range of citation. And I'm wondering, are you doing that from scratch for each LibGuide, or is anyone, on the one hand, the idea of a publicly accessible list of scholars with their race or ethnicity listed seems kind of terrifying, but also there's a lot of duplication of effort. I'm just wondering if you're making that information available, or if everyone's just starting from scratch each time. I can see reasons to go both ways.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for your question. I am not aware of a big database that would provide that information. So I do believe that our whoever our LibGuide authors are just kind of starting from scratch. But like I said, it's just one tool, and also not all of our LibGuides use individuals as a resource. A lot of them are mostly like database sourced, right? So, or give databases as resources. So I think it actually points back to what Charlotte's talking about in terms of at least just bringing about the awareness of the skewedness of of the systems that we're in. And yeah, I don't have any, I don't have a magical answer. Sorry, it's work.
Great. So a couple things for Michele. So we have one comment that says maybe a conversation should be had with catalogers about adding fields for DEI info. And then we have one question of what are the prospects of approaching publishers on the back end of DEI initiatives to let them know academic DEI needs? For example, hiring more diverse executive leadership and putting into place more DEI policies.
So, well, that's two questions. So yes, we have. So our DEI library committee has discussed when we were trying to export from the catalog, everything so that we could search it and then run the DEI audit. We were like, isn't there an easier way to do this? Like, isn't there something that will tell us some information? And we talked to people at Innovative or Sierra, whatever. This is not my part, but we did talk to the people who own the catalog about the fields that they have in place, and they don't have anything like DEI related in the catalog itself, which is very irritating. Yes. And then if you read some of those books, like Charlotte talked about, I think Sophia Noble's, right, about like algorithms of oppression and stuff, like the way that cataloging works and how Library of Congress has subject headings, they're racist. Like there is academic work on that. So it's difficult. It's difficult to add those, and it would be a lot of work to add metadata for that to the catalog. It is something that we have talked about though, so I get where you're coming from with that. And then the one for your question for approaching DEI initiatives on the back end, getting publishers to have more hiring practices that are better and adding more DEI things. Again, like I feel it's like they put out anti-racist statements. What are they doing about it? Are they doing anything? Like, is there anything we can do to make them change other than hold back our money from them? Like if we don't pay them anymore, maybe they would make a change, but I don't think they're gonna do anything just because we tell them to. So I guess I don't have an answer to that specifically, but yeah, it would be nice if they did.
I mean, I think we are our customers, and we are their customers.
Yes, we can make demands, but
ask for more. Yeah.
maybe demand is the wrong word.
Yeah, we can make demands. I like that word. Let's make demands. I will say for several years in a row now at every ALA meeting, I've been going around to the exhibit floor and asking if they have any authors of color or ERCs for me. And it's embarrassing for the publishers. It's an embarrassing moment for them. Yeah. Actually, the Canadian poet publishers are really, really good. They have good native representation.
Okay, this question was directed to Michele, but I think it might be applicable to a couple people. So it says, do you have any processes in place to defund or demote publishers, journals, or databases where racism or sexism is revealed? They're thinking of the recent kerfluffle with the CEO of MDPI and the responses to that. They removed reference to MDPI from their publishing discounts LibGuide.
So I will say at Pacific, we do not, I don't know of anything in place at the moment. I have no say in any purchasing decisions. Like that's not part of my job at all. So I can't do anything about that. But as far as I know, there's no conversations like that, but there might be, and I don't know about them.
Okay. And then this one's also to Michele. So for the
Charlotte,
DEI,
did you want to say something?
It's fine.
sorry, I'm sorry.
Okay. If there was another question, then we can just move on to that.
Okay, if you're good to go. Okay, for the DEI criteria list, is that a simple checklist that you use for your review?
Yeah, so it was one of the ones that was for a kindergarten classroom where the teacher decided that she wanted to do it just for the picture books that they had in their classroom. And so it was the list that she made that we were like, yes, this is good. Like it has the ones for the authors, and then it has ones for the covers and for the abstracts to like look at the main characters. So as I said, we added some things that they weren't doing in that classroom audit because we were doing she was just doing anti-racist ones, like she was just doing for that, and we were doing for, because of the president's charge, like we were doing everything, so like we had to add more fields, and we still probably could have added more. But yeah, it's one of the articles that's in the RefWorks folder that I included the link to on my slides.
The Cooperative Children's Book Center at the School of Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison actually keeps track of demographic representation, both in authors and in characters for children's books. So that's a really great resource if you want to check that out. They've been doing that since the Coretta Scott King Book Awards were established, and they could only find like 19 books about Black folks. Period.
Okay.
And I will say, so Sophia Noble, like her book is about, basically what happened when she searched like Black girls. She got porn, right? And her book and her work has gotten enough notice now that if you search Black girls, you don't necessarily get porn, but it is like kind of playing whack-a-mole because it hasn't been solved for like if you search other kinds of girls. If you search Asian girls, you still get porn. It's like I don't know why they wouldn't fix it for all women. But I would say like if you do find an incident of racism or bias or ableism or sexism in any of your databases, publicize it. Let us all know. Yeah, I feel like sometimes that's what you need to do to move the needle.
We have a couple more questions still coming in. So one is to all panelists. So how do you see pandemic pressures, especially pressures on your library budgets, affecting your DEI and anti-racism efforts?
I mean, so I'm sure everyone will say that it is affecting what we can purchase. One of the plus sides, though, is that because of the pandemic, the library is closed and we aren't hiring student workers to work inside the library, which means that we do have a large student worker budget that we will now be using to hire students for next semester to work on our DEI audit. So that's good for us for that.
Another question for all is, I had a faculty member request that their students choose research articles authored by POC. Any tips on how to direct students to do this?
Oh, what subject field? Ethnic studies. Oh, yeah.
I don't know if I can jump in. I don't know, Charlotte, you have thoughts? So I think part of the idea of like why we're doing these discussion sessions is that we're trying to hold ourselves accountable for doing that work, right? Because in the end, that's like a reference, like a librarian's like job to make sure that we can find those sources, or at least point towards those sources, and like that then just takes time and work, and it's not like an easy like one-way street answer. But again, I think it is just making sure that we can be transparent about like who we're citing ourselves. And I guess in speaking about like all of this extra work, I wanted to address that other question about pandemic pressures, because I do think that, like for me, I would like to at least acknowledge that working in the pandemic is like hard, right? It seems like we're all working like 4 times as much, and we're just staring at a screen for like 10 hours, and it's hard. And so that's like on top of trying to make sure that we're doing all like the right things. And so I say this because I think something that I think about a lot in terms of doing these projects is making sure that like the people who I'm working with, like their needs are at least met as much as I can provide. So if that means like time, then, you know, some blocked off time so that we don't have to be Zooming for like 4 hours a day to make sure that, you know, we're doing the normal thing during a pandemic, you know? So I think it's important to see that kind of work, or that kind of like taking time to think about our fellow like coworkers as part of your DEI efforts. Because I also think that the reason why I'm always talking about LibGuides is because it is so incorporated into like our daily work. And so it's not something extra, right? It's not something like, oh, also DEI. It's like our everyday jobs. And so to like naturally incorporate that into what we're supposed, like tasked to do, like navigate the world wide web of databases and, you know, articles and scholarship, and then at least try to start pointing people to the right direction. Also, I don't know if my train of thought like makes sense, but there's just something about like time, work, and like how we separate the ideas of like what is DEI and what isn't. So
yeah, I'm gonna second what Jaime says about looking at our coworkers. I mean, I think in our library, it was really hard to see the furloughs happening at the hourly staff level, which is of course has a higher percentage of people of color. And across the university, actually, admin and hourly staff were furloughed and laid off at a higher percentage than like, you know, sort of upper level administrative and even faculty and librarian level. So like, you know, the higher up you get, the wider you get. So that was really sort of distressing to see, because of course, like in a university, we have a DEI mission and statement and all that kind of thing. So holding people accountable to that sometimes is just really necessary. In other ways, I'm really glad that the civil rights movement that we've all experienced this year has led to, if not more resources in terms of money, sorry, Michele, but at least like attention and time, right? And the understanding that this is important, right? And the ability to do things like build a Black Lives Matter archive, or like that's specific to our institution, or, you know, a COVID-19 response archive that's specific to the institution.
We are at 3:01, so I think we've reached time. I want to again thank our panelists, Jaime, Charlotte, and Michele, both for the presentations and the wonderful conversation afterwards. We really, really appreciate your time. And thank you to my fellow SCORE officers, Melissa and Kristen, for helping me to facilitate this. So, and thank you all attendees for coming and sharing this with us. Take care, everyone.